afternoon. Today is June 10th and it's noon and we are in the library community room. And I'm going to call this General Services Public Works Committee meeting to order. And with me today is Council Members Wood and English. We have 2 items on our agenda today. Actually, we have 3 items on our agenda today, and the first being public comment. And I'd like to suggest that if we have public comment for item number 2 or 3, that we'll have the staff presentation first, and then the public is welcome to come and comment on them after the staff presents the item. So with that, is there any public comment or anybody in the audience wanting to give public comment on an item not listed on the agenda? Okay. So we're going to go ahead and start with item number 2, approving a letter of agreement with Gary Cooper, doing business as Garnet Adventures LLC for commercial use of the city streets for recreational transit. And with us today, we have Kelly Setters, our Deputy City Clerk. Hello.
Afternoon. So we received a proposal, an application to operate a pedal pub on the city streets by Gary Cooper of Granite Adventures. And this is similar to what's come before you before, was socially geared cycle pub in the past. Kind of similar concept. So I'm going to go over the tour route and schedule. He plans to have it seasonal from, he just told me May, like late May would be the earliest he would start, to October, end of October. And then there'll be 3 tours, Thursday through Sunday, and they're 2.5 hours long. The maximum seating capacity is 14, and all tours will be begin and end at the Granite Adventures location on Lakeside Avenue near Sherman and 17th Street. So one of the tours is a scenic tour for all ages. So they will start at 11 a.m. and they'll stop at the Roosevelt Inn, Fort Sherman, and the Carousel. And here's a view of that, those stops. And there's no alcohol allowed on this tour, the 11 o'clock tour. The second one is the alcohol establishment sightseeing tour, which there's 2 available. They're scheduled for 3 o'clock and the second one at 7 o'clock. And guests must be over 21 and are allowed to bring their own sealed beer, seltzer, or wine for consumption while on board the bike. And their stops are The Goat on 4th, 315 Cuisine on Wallace Avenue, Seasons Restaurant on 3rd Street. And here's a map of that. So they don't go into the Fort Grounds neighborhood, or they kind of twist around. The first stop's here. They go to Roosevelt Inn and back around down front to kind of less impact on the traffic. So they're kind of out of the way. So we did receive some comments from the Fort Ground homeowners, and they ranged from they didn't like it, they don't like the idea of alcohol, and the hour, like 10 o'clock in the neighborhood, we don't want a pub cycle going through there. So, and there was some people that did like it. They like the environment that it gives you, like the charm and of the location of Art on the Green and Ironman and 4th of July. So with that, we're asking that the council should approve a letter of agreement with Gary Cooper, doing business at Garnet Adventures for commercial use of the city streets recreational transit.
Kelly, just a couple of things. Can you please pull up the map that I think was 2 slides back?
Okay.
The alcohol tour, the one that
The alcohol tour.
the
map.
3 and 7 p.m. So it does not go through the Fort Grounds.
It goes, and I have the applicant here, if he can explain it better than I. But yeah, it goes up to Roosevelt here, so it's really just on 2nd, and then it goes by the Coeur d'Alene Coffee Shop there and around.
Okay. So
and down around towards Sandersby.
the concerns from some of the residents in Fort Grounds with the alcohol consumption and potential noise disruption close to 10 p.m., that won't be a concern with this route.
Because this one is the 21-year-old
Okay,
tour, and this one goes in the Fort Grounds area, which is the all ages, no alcohol in that neighborhood.
at 11 a.m.
Yes.
And do you remember the previous socially geared route? I remember it going along the Lakeshore Drive. This one seems to be a little bit different through the Fort Grounds area. Did you compare? It really doesn't matter. I'm just curious.
I did not
Okay.
compare them.
Great.
But yeah, I think the socially geared went all the way down, didn't it?
Yeah, that's
to
my
down
memory, but-
here. That's what I believe you are correct.
Council, any questions?
Yeah, thank you. I guess a comment. It appears that our code already allows for this, very specific for this type of business. So there aren't really any questions about alcohol use if we've already amended the code to allow for it. And it's just a matter of a business has come forward with a permit, and I think our goal is to be business friendly.
Yeah, and I guess I hadn't picked up on the one for all family and non-alcohol, because, I was thinking, oh, this would be great with our, grandkids coming this summer or something, and so, yeah, I think it's good, and like all of these, it's like, yeah, well, let's give it a go, and then, if something goes sideways or we need to tweak, but I'm optimistic it'll go right. So I would be happy to make a motion to recommend that council approve a letter of agreement with Gary Cooper doing business as Garnet Adventures for commercial use of city streets for recreational translates into this, okay.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Just to reiterate that we aren't changing city code. This is an existing code, and they're complying with it, and therefore we would have no reason to deny this request.
And I'll just add that I'm really impressed with the routes and being thoughtful to minimize the impact on our existing neighborhoods. I think I commend you for that. Thank you.
And yesterday, I just happened to be driving through Wallace, and, very compact, and there was one of these things in Wallace there, so there you go.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. We are on to our final item. I'd like to remind you that we are going to allow public comment for this item. I would ask that you stay within our guidelines of 3 minutes. You'll hear a warning from our voice behind the scenes at 30 seconds, letting you know that your time is almost up. So thank you to adhering to our rules there. Our item before us today is consideration of amendments to Municipal Code 15.50.210, 15.50.400C, and Section 15.50.410H pertaining to billboards, and 15.50.400D pertaining to electronic message displays. With us today is Hillary Anderson, our Community Planning Director. Welcome, Hillary.
Thank you. All right, good afternoon, council members. So I am presenting to you some proposed updates to the sign code. As you recall, at the December 19th, 2023 meeting, council members requested that staff provide an opportunity for council to revisit the amendments that were done to the sign code and to provide ways to allow for the movement of existing billboards within city limits. So I wanted to just provide a little bit of context before we jump in and explain a few things, talk about where we've been, kind of the intent of the sign code, and also the code amendments that were made in 2022. And so if you recall, kind of at that time when we came to you with the amendments in 2022, one of the big reasons we did that was because of constitutionality. So there was a 2015 U.S. Supreme Court decision that made it very clear that communities cannot regulate the content of signs. So we can't say what can or cannot be put on the signs. Now we can regulate where they're located, time, place, manner, things like that, but we cannot regulate what they say. So that was a big part of the 2022 changes that were made. The purpose of the sign code, this has kind of been in place for a long time, and this is in the current code today, but just wanted to clarify kind of set the framework for the code. So the city has determined that signs can obstruct views, distract motorists, displace alternative uses for land, and affect the aesthetics of a community. So in that, the city finds and declares that it's necessary to regulate the construction, erection, maintenance, electrification, illumination, type, size, number, and location of signs. And there's a variety of things listed here, including health, safety, and welfare, kind of the neat, clean, and orderly appearance of the city, information needs, protecting and preserving the scenic beauty of the city, making sure we don't cause any traffic safety issues, and then promoting a healthy business climate. So in 2022, in March, we came forward with some changes to the code, including the changing so it doesn't have anything to do with content. We also really did a number to make sure that we condensed the code. It was very long prior to that, so we shortened it substantially from 31 pages to 19 pages. We simplified things. There was 19 exemptions. We brought that down to 9. We simplified the number of codes, so those are some big things. Also clarified responsible party regarding the application and clarified enforcement process. At the time of the council meeting, City Council, during the motion, changed some additional things that staff had not brought forward. So those 3 items on the screen, we were not able to kind of weave into the code at that time. So the code was amended at that time. This first one said the billboard may not be enlarged, structurally altered, or moved to a different location. So that was in the code before. That was struck as part of those amendments. The second one was any billboards that are located within the site of an annexation. So prior to 2022, those would have to be removed within 60 days of annexation. And then the last one is regarding the damage to the billboard. So if they were damaged beyond 50% of the fair market value, then they would have to be removed. So those were struck from the code. This first one has created some of the questions today and why we're before you on the ability to move or not to move billboards. However, the current code does clearly say existing billboards may remain in place. So I'm going to have Kelly come up and explain how our sign code works in terms of sign allowances, because we have this very specific formula that was developed, and then I'll come back up.
Okay, so when an applicant comes in, they submit an application, and the way I figure out their total sign allowance is I take the frontage, the longest frontage that they have on their parcel, so this one happens to be 225. And so we times that by 3, and it's 675 square feet of total signage that they have for all signage. So on that note, we go to the freestanding allowance calculation. So I take that frontage amount and times it by driving lane factor, which this one is 175. Then we times that by 0.25 for the density factor, which gives them 98 plus the 32 that we add for sign area factor, which their total comes to 130 square feet. But the maximum for this zone, which is C17, is 100 square feet. So we subtract that out, and this bottom number is what they have left over for wall signage that they can use. So here's an example of a building that has it's the 225-foot frontage. They have this itty-bitty sign here for their pole sign, so they're way under 36 square feet of signage for their pole sign, and they could go to 100, but they chose not to. And then they have this little wall sign, which they could have 575, they could have several signs here. That's just an example. This one is located on Lee Court, which is right off the I-90. And this is on-premise non-conforming sign. And this is not a billboard sign because it's on the parcel. I know it kind of looks like a billboard, but it's non-conforming freestanding sign. So if this were to be damaged, taken down, anything like that, their allowance on that I-90 corridor is 160 square feet at 50 feet tall. So that's just an example of.
Kelly, is it
Yes.
appropriate to ask questions?
Sure.
So what is the sign now?
It is, we had no data on that one,
So you don't know the size.
no. I think it's in your I kind of tried to measure it from, oops, I went too far. I tried to measure it from, our GIS system. And, oops. And I think it was, I want to say 600 and something, maybe. So it's a big sign. It's just like the billboards, because billboards now are like 600 and something.
Yeah, it looks big, and it's both sides, right? So, does that matter if they get both
But
sides?
we would just allot them, we only calculate in the one side. So we wouldn't say this is 300 and the other side is 300, so that's 600. It would be, we would just calculate one side as their allowance. We don't do two sides, so just the one.
But something like this wouldn't come into being again.
Right,
No,
this-
no,
right.
okay.
Okay, with that, bring back up Hillary, sorry.
No problem. Oh, you're good. Thanks. You put it back, so that's perfect. Okay. So again, the reason the staff is here before you is this council request from December of 2023, asking us to come forward with some possible amendments to the code to allow for billboards, legal billboards within city limits to be relocated. So wanted to talk to you about the current code regarding billboards. So there is, even in our abbreviated code that was adopted in 2022, there are some definitions, excuse me, and some clarification on what is a billboard or what is not a billboard. But because we did streamline the code so much, and because there wasn't, at that time, the intent to allow billboards to be relocated, it's missing kind of a lot of information. And so you'll see what we're proposing before you today has a lot more information, just to allow and consider billboards being within the city versus staying where they are kind of in place and just allowing modification through digital signs. So the definition of billboards says off-premises sign, which is leased or rented by its owner to a third party for the purpose of conveying a commercial or non-commercial message. So that's what's in place now, and then we do clarify permanent signs, and that includes billboards or other off-premises signs. As noted previously, this is the language that's in the code now. Billboards that were lawful on December 1st, 2019 may remain in place. So the intent at that time was not to allow them to relocate. And then other permanent off-premises signs are prohibited. So only billboards are allowed to be off-premise signs. You can't have other off-premise signs in the city. So previous codes, so prior to the March 2022 amendments, we had this language in place talking about billboards and off-premises signs being prohibited. And billboards are here more clearly noted as outdoor advertising signs, stating that the placement of any of those signs is prohibited, and then the exception saying if they're allowed and in place. They must be well-maintained, maintained in a safe fashion, and must display a current message, and they may not have been enlarged or structurally altered. That changed in 2022. Also, in the prior code, this had some provisions on extensions and projections for billboards, so not exceeding 5% of the surface size for 300 square feet, or 10% if it was a larger sign, up to 672 square feet. The lighting for each sign must be directed only toward the sign surface, so there wouldn't be kind of that light pollution from it. And then this is kind of the big one, and what leads into some of the proposed language today is that it was only allowed on commercial and manufacturing zone properties. It wasn't allowed to allow for them to be relocated only within commercially zoned properties, manufacturing and light manufacturing zones, so that's consistent with the prior code. And then adding in some provisions that are more related to what you would see typically for land use and zoning. So adding in planning and zoning setbacks so that it would have to meet the building setbacks, having the height be consistent with that, requiring a separation between signs. And this last one I want to clarify, so underground electrical, this came up at the last subcommittee meeting and we weren't very clear. This, in the proposed code, it says underground electrical if there's power within the property or within 75 feet. So it's not just you have to do it no matter what. So this is how the code is proposed currently, requiring a public hearing with the city council. And that's because some of the locations might be. So you can see that's along Highway 95. You can see that's most of Apple Way, some of Northwest Boulevard. Anything with the crosshatches is not considered just C17. That might be a C17 with a planned unit development overlay. But the areas that are specifically the bright red, including these areas in 3rd Street and 4th Street. And then down in this area, we have some C17. East Sherman has C17 along Coeur Lake Drive. There's some other location, then some pockets on 15th Street and Best as well. The manufacturing and light manufacturing, so manufacturing is the darker gray, and then the lighter gray is up here. So this is Schreiber Way, this is Kathleen, so on the south side and on the north side along the west side of 95 is that light manufacturing, and then up in Industrial Loop is also manufacturing. So just want to clarify that. So when we had drafted the code initially and sent it to Lamar and Yesco, we were anticipating that the billboards to be relocated would only be 300 square feet, and so that was kind of drafted that way. They indicated to us that there are some, there's not many, but there are a few that are along I-90, along kind of the Celtice corridor, that are closer to 672 square feet, and so we worked with them to build that into the proposed code you have before you. And looking at the old code, clarifying where it would be appropriate for those, so that's within the 615 feet of I-90, as measured from the edge of the travel lane closest to the right-of-way, and on properties abutting US 95 within 615 feet of Interstate 90. And we also allowed for some other locations that weren't anticipated in the older code, and that's consistent with where the signs are now, so in between Celtice and I-90. Also want to point out in the proposed code, we would restrict the billboards within 500 feet of residentially zoned property, so that's not to say if there's a residence within a commercial zone. This is if there is truly a residentially zoned neighborhood, so 500 feet within a park, school, church, cemetery, or historic district. So currently, there are 8 locations within the city limit, and it has 1 foot setback from the property line on I-90. I did want to point out, and Kelly had mentioned it, I don't think she did today, but in the prior subcommittee, we talked about that ITD, so Idaho Transportation Department, does have their own regulations for billboards. So they require them to be 5,000 feet apart on an interstate, that they can't overhang and that they have to meet those structural setbacks. So this is another one on Celtice Way. This is very close, just east of the digital billboard. This is a Yesco sign, and this has not been converted. And it's my understanding they are not able to convert to digital because they're too close to the other one. So that would be a restriction of ITD. We don't have any data on record, so we don't know the specifications of this particular sign, but that's where that one's located. And then this is on Northwest Boulevard. We don't have a address, but this is the tax ID number. We also don't have any data on record. This is a shorter one, and so this is on the east side of Northwest Boulevard. And you can see it's only one sign face, and then the back doesn't have a sign face. Here's one on Northwest Boulevard. It's on the property line between these two addresses, so between 1924 and 1910 Northwest Boulevard. Again, no data on record for this location. It's a double-sided sign face. You can see the 2 sign faces here. And this is another one on Northwest Boulevard, 1621 Northwest Boulevard. We do have the dimensions for this one, so it's 12 feet by 25 feet. Shape construction on 1 pole. So these are the 2, actually these are both facing south, but it is on both sides. So this is a 300 square foot billboard, so that's kind of a standard size. Here's again the setbacks, so 1 foot from the property line on US 95, and then 2 feet on the south property line. And then here is one on the east side of US 95, just north of the At Home store. And this is one where there's 3 sign faces, so it's a little bit different how it is. So it's a larger sign face facing south, and then these are facing north. There's 2 sign faces on that structure. This one has the larger sign face because of this one, so it's 672 square feet, and then it is 45 feet tall. So just a little bit of clarification on another part of the code that you're seeing is related to our electronic sign standards. So we thought this was a good opportunity to bring this forward. We didn't address it much with the 2022 sign code, and since then, we've had some complaints about some of the digital signs around the community that cause concerns for drivers. They're kind of flashing at them and doing different things, playing videos and becoming distracting. The police department has received some calls about different locations. And so we asked the police department to assist us in evaluating some of the signs. And so Sergeant Renault went out in an evening, 2 a.m., and so he went out and measured a variety of different digital signs, so the smaller ones that are on-premise signs, as well as some of the digital billboards, just to figure out were there any issues with them. In looking at our current sign standards, so we allow 500 nits at night and 5,000 nits during the day. So he evaluated that. He used a light meter, had to do a conversion because our light meter does not read nits, so he had to convert that back from foot candles to nits. He found that they were compliant with the current code, but thought that the 500 nits is too bright. We shouldn't allow that intensity at night, and conversely, 5,000 nits in the day is too bright. Looking at best practices that we received from the billboard industry, from the Outdoor Advertising Association of America, we're proposing some changes to our current code that would apply not only to billboards, but to our other digital signs in the city to make it more consistent with best practices. So relating to using foot candles instead of nits, which is a lot easier and more accurate to measure, as well as the distance from the sign face for doing those measurements for the foot candles. The foot candles, I wanted to clarify with that would be based on ambient conditions, because that was also a point of clarification that the last subcommittee asked. So depending on if it's a dim day, if it's cloudy, or if it's bright, or if it's at night, then it would adjust. And then auto dimming would be kind of the technology that would be built in for best practices. And then holding displays for 8 seconds versus 2 seconds and restricting videos.
Question on that.
Yes.
I'm not really understanding all of that. I understand the brightness of what you're trying to say, but are you suggesting that any current billboards that are digital would have to be changed? Like they would have to
have the technology built in, and so I think they are probably fine for at night. I don't know, I haven't looked at what they would look like for the day, but it sounds like it's an easy measurement, so it's something that they
So the technology is already built in?
It is already
It's
built
not
in.
going to be a big expense to
Correct.
go change?
That's
Okay.
correct, yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
you.
Good clarification. Okay, so this is an example that was presented when we came before you in 2022 of what sign codes that aren't meeting our performance standards can do and appear when you are in your vehicle and you see something like this. It's very distracting. You can kind of get that night blindness, and you also might think something's going on, as in this one where maybe on your dashboard it looks like there's a cop car behind you or something. So we have since addressed the issue with this particular sign, but we do have some other signs that have presented some issues. Wanted to point out, so we've addressed the issue, but even the former IGA, so the Lakeside Harvest Foods sign, when they converted to the digital, they were all excited because it can present a lot of information. Well, we started getting repeated calls from Parkside owners because they could see it in their units at night. So it can go that many blocks, depending on how bright it is and the colors that are used. Also, ICCU has their large sign on their bank building on Appleway. You can see it across the river. So some of our signs, including, I'll show you kind of the Robidoux one, we've had some complaints because just depending on, is it dusk, is it dawn, what time of day is it, and if the signs are really bright or have constant messaging or changing images, it can be quite distracting for drivers and a safety concern. So here's some examples of electronic signs. So this could be reader boards. It could be that the whole sign is changing and is kind of video imaging and flashing to different colors. So this has been one where there's been some issues and some reports to police department, concerns for traffic safety, especially close proximity to an intersection. So this is, as I mentioned, the current code looks at nits. So in the daytime, it's 5,000 nits, and at night, it's 500 nits. So we would like to change that to foot candles. And then also, it's only 2 seconds it has to hold an image versus 8 seconds. And then we do say currently, no sign that which actually or apparently blinks or flashes shall be allowed. So we've been able to work with some of the sign owners on that, but we would like to change this just to make it better performing and consistent with best practices. Also wanted to point out that the current code, it does clarify rotation speed of a sign shall not exceed 9 rotations per minute, and this was a question at your last subcommittee meeting. That means like a sign that's actually physically rotating. So the Metro Car Wash sign where the top is spinning, this doesn't mean a video or an image kind of scrolling through. So it's the actual physical sign. So I wanted to clarify that. And then we do clarify in here a minimum font size. We don't have a maximum font size. So some of our reader boards are quite large. So proposed amendments, again, really just looking at best practices related to electronic signs, would be clarifying that the distraction includes motorists, pedestrians, and the general public, so that we can make it more clear for the enforcement of that. Requiring technology for auto dimming, and then noted using foot candles instead of the nits. So it'd be 0.3 foot candles, and that would be above ambient conditions. So that would be something that the signs could automatically adjust to, because they have the technology built in. And that is based on the best practices that the billboard industry has also suggested. Again, holding images to a minimum of 8 seconds, clarifying no videos, and wanted to note the suggestions from the last subcommittee. So there was concerns that in the proposed code we have that the land leases would be reviewed by the city attorney. So that was something that Lamar had expressed some concern with, and so the council subcommittee had asked to have consideration and discussion on that.
Hillary,
Yes.
if I may, I tend to agree with that concern. No offense to Randy, he's a great attorney, but he's a city attorney, he's not a corporate attorney for them. So I don't believe that it's the city's role to review corporations' leases. So I too have an issue with that, and if that comes before council, we can express it there, but.
Okay, great. The next one was just clarifying that foot candle was above ambient lighting, because if you don't talk about ambient lighting, that 0.3 foot candles could sound like it's not very much. So that would be above ambient lighting. Wanted to clarify the rotating signs, already did that. The other thing, just wanted to clarify, because it came up the last subcommittee, was the ability to regulate content. So it sounds like maybe Washington does restrict billboards near schools from having anything to do with cannabis sales or alcohol or cigarette sales or any adult businesses. In Idaho, and Randy's position is we can't do that. So that state, the U.S. Supreme Court determination, we can't regulate content. And so even if a business that's legal in Washington, selling cannabis because it's legal in Washington and that's a business that can legally sell it, we can't say no. So a billboard could show that on their sign in Coeur d'Alene.
I have a question on that.
Okay.
I believe I know the answer. I believe the local companies they regulate their own industry standards, and they would not put a cannabis, marketing cannabis in Idaho. That's their own industry standards, so it won't happen regardless whether we put it in code or not. And I can see that we're not allowed to, but it's just, they have their own industry standards, and so that wouldn't occur.
Okay, and then wanted to get input. The other subcommittee asked to get some input on the public hearing, if that should be required or not. And then wanted to clarify, as I already noted, the underground electrical, but they asked for the subcommittee to weigh in if that was an appropriate requirement, given the provisions, either if it's on site or within 75 feet.
Hillary, what did the companies, what was their feedback on that?
Well, I know Neil with Lamar is here today, and he might want to speak to that specifically. I think the concern was if it's not available on-site or nearby, they just didn't want it to be unreasonable, but I'll let him.
But
Speak to that
so we have a
specifically.
provision if it's not
We
nearby.
do, and it
Okay.
that didn't come across clearly last subcommittee, even though it was already in the proposed code. So it says either it's on-site or within 75 feet.
Okay,
So
thank
we'll
you.
see if that is more
Thank you.
workable.
Is it okay just to shout out? Thank you.
And then the last.
So one more on that, because I think requiring public, well, it's going to come to council, any of these, I understand. And then it seems like these days we are into public hearings and more, public input. So is that, I guess if that's a question, Mark, we'll answer that.
That's how it's drafted in the current proposal. So staff was recommending that would be a good thing in addition to the
Yes.
other performance standards, just to get input from the public.
Yeah.
That's a question for council.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
I'm not opposed to public input. I am opposed, because the public can come at any time to our meetings and give input, and they should. But I am opposed to one specific business being required to come before council for a public hearing. So, but we can talk about that at council.
And then the other two items that they had asked for some clarification and discussion on is the transition time. So we had a community member that's actually here today, and James Filmer wanted to speak about some kind of best practices for digital signage, and one of those is including transition times between messages would be 1/2 second or less. So council seemed to like that, and then he also made a recommendation for lighting on non-digital billboards to have the lighting be downward instead of upward, just kind of for that, preventing light pollution. So those are the items, and so asking for your input today, and as noted before, we do have a few community members and representatives here from industries that
There
wanted to
was
speak.
One more thing on
Sure.
this list, potential for mobile billboards.
Yes, thank you, that wasn't on this slide. So yes, that was another thing that did come up. We did have some discussion about that, and that is something that we wanted to get input from you as well, because there are, in other states and other cities, we're starting to see that trucks are being advertised as mobile billboards. There's also billboard boats. So we have the ability within our city, we have an area of the waterways that's within our city and have our zoning district. We also have kind of the other areas of the city where we might have people come with a billboard on a truck. So wanted to get input from council on if that should be included in her or not. And that is in the draft proposal that is before you today. That was updated. And the updated draft also includes this transition time of 1/2 second or less.
In the draft proposal, you have the language for the mobile billboard.
We do, Randy, I don't
see the
know where
last
you
bullet point, yeah.
put that one, but that is in there.
Well, in other communities, there are buses, there are trucks. I haven't seen the boat thing, but I think it's worthy of council having a discussion.
And where would the campaign billboards on the back of pickup, I mean, it's talking about mobile when drive up and down a couple of big sheets of plywood, or is that we can't touch political, or?
Randy, how would that, so how we have it written, and you can see it on page 6 of the proposed ordinance, it says, mobile billboards are off-premises commercial signs that are mounted on trucks, trailers, boats, or are otherwise readily movable. Mobile billboards are prohibited in all zoning districts. So
So it sounds, okay,
include-
good, it would prohibit that around election.
But they're already
anytime.
doing it, I suppose. I'm seeing that, Dan, what
Yeah,
you're talking about.
But we
One in
will
particular I can
crack
think of.
down, okay.
Yeah, to exempt political signs would be content-based.
Yeah.
So we either have to prevent them all,
Yeah,
or we have to allow them
yeah,
all.
well, that's a good idea. Oh, I mean yeah, okay. Oh, and one other is as far as the potential, because I remember when this first came up recently, and we, the whole potential for like emergency public service message, tornadoes coming, and I guess in some places we see the Amber Alert, don't remember it, but is that something that the companies already do, or should we have something for some kind of emergency public service
I will let
announcement?
Randy speak to that if he knows the answer on that.
Well, I think we could
We don't
probably,
currently require that.
No, but do they do that?
I don't think that would be part of the sign code.
Okay.
Okay, at this time, we have an opportunity for public comment, and so I would propose to my fellow council members that we allow the public to come give 3 minutes of public comment, and then we'll continue discussion at
Sure.
the conclusion. So if anybody is here to talk on the item of billboards, you are welcome to come forward at this time.
Thank you for letting us have this opportunity. My name's Neil Schreibeis. I'm with Lamar Outdoor Advertising, and I live in Kootenai County. Last time I was here, we didn't have the 3 minutes, so I'm not going to go over everything that I said before, I guess. But I would like to address a few things. As far as content being regulated, it can be. It's illegal to, I'll use cigarettes. You can't advertise cigarettes on a billboard anywhere. You'll never see that anywhere in the United States, so it can be regulated. We do our own regulations, but any illegal product, which cannabis is illegal in Idaho, we can't advertise in Idaho. We can't. And there's other things too as well, so it can be regulated. We do public service. It's automatic. If there's an Amber Alert, it's on every one of our digital signs.
I have a question on
We do-
that.
pardon me.
Is that a requirement or is that goodwill?
That's goodwill for Lamar. We do that. And we have that for other things too. We could set anything up with the city. We do that all over the United States. If there's something they want to present out there, emergency, we'll do that for them.
Thank you.
It's actually built into our clients' contracts, that there's times when we can interrupt it for those kind of things. It doesn't happen that often, so it's, but. As far as the content, you're already restricting or making differences in the content because the difference between an off-premise and an on-premise sign. And I think that came up with wanting the attorney to look at every lease because they didn't want the off-premise sign adding additional on-premise signage, which that's a legitimate complaint because, you know, all you have to do is put it in the ordinance that we can't do that. That we can't put that, whatever's on the property, we can't advertise on our signs. And there could be a violation for it. You could have a fine or tell us to take it down, whatever you want to put in there. Would be simple, rather than the attorney having to look at every one of them. I also I wanted to address the distance away from I-90. I don't know if, and I remember we had the discussion when I met with them before. I think it's going to keep it congested if we can't move a board farther than 615 feet away from I-90. Right now, one of the concerns is that most of the boards are along Northwest Boulevard. And if we have to be congested.
30 seconds.
If we have to be congested along 615 feet, that's just gonna keep them congested right in the same area. Instead of moving like one of them on 95 farther out, it would spread them out so they're less visible all in one area. And I guess I'll quit there.
Madam Chair, I'm not sure why he was restricted to 3 minutes. If we have questions, we want to ask him questions to better understand.
We can certainly ask questions. I'm trying to stay with our typical protocol of 3 minutes of public comment, but
Last time, I guess they
Ask
didn't do
questions.
that.
I'm not aware of that, so.
Yeah,
We get to set ours, so.
Yeah.
yeah.
But please, if you have questions, Councilman.
Well, he was answering some of the stuff that we brought up. And
But okay. And as far as the power going underground, we're not opposed to, obviously, it's more expensive for us, but if there's power overhead already for the property, why do we need to be underground? Why are we being singled out to do that? I do know they mentioned that they're trying to do that for every new development, but if the power is already overhead, why do we need to be underground when it's already there? It just seems like we're being singled out a little bit. Go ahead.
real quick, though, I think the exception was made, the language was made that if, maybe Hillary, you could clarify that, because that was one of my questions.
So it needs to be underground if it's already available on site or within 75 feet
I mean,
for the
underground.
power.
If there's already underground power there, otherwise, no.
Randy, do you recall, was it if it was already underground on site? Or was it already just power on site?
My understanding of the language is that if power is available on site or within 75 feet where it can be attached underground, then that's what would have to be. So it's like any other ordinance where we gradually achieve an end. When there is something new that happens, it has to comply. If there's something existing, it can stay. So if there's existing overhead power lines, we can't do anything about that. But if we can require a new use or a new construction to be underground, if it's within a certain distance, and that's what the city has said they want to do.
Did we examine the expense of that?
I don't know that the council asked that when,
No, but if we're going to impose these kind of restrictions, and as I said, the power's right there, I would just want to know what the expense would be. And I don't, Neil, you probably don't know that off the top of your head.
No, I don't.
May I clarify one more thing that he mentioned, then let him continue? The thing on the 615-foot setback, that's only if the sign of the billboard is 672 square feet. If it's a typical 300 square feet, that was anywhere the zone C17, manufacturing or light manufacturing. So the red areas, the gray and the light gray on that map. So I just want to
Okay.
clarify that.
Which, on that note, if we have one on 95 that's farther away, we would have to put it closer to I-90. If it's existing,
675?
yeah. 672 square feet is what you're saying.
Right. Although in that current location, it's allowed to be retrofitted if you keep it in the same location.
Exactly, but what if we
Right.
can't or don't want to keep it in that location?
Right, then it
If
would
we
have to
move
be.
it, then we have to move it closer to I-90, and it's going to
Correct.
congest it more.
That's how it's proposed, correct?
Okay.
The 500 feet to a school, or any of the other ones that were on there, is going to restrict us as well. One thing that we would be willing to offer is that we wouldn't be able to, and this may go back to what he's talking about, restricting the content, but we wouldn't be able to do alcohol or whatever if we're that close to a school or a park or something, maybe 300 feet. And I don't know if that's the reasoning behind the 500 feet, because there's going to be residential, could be possibly in the area, but we would restrict those kind of things, not to offend anybody.
In the current locations, are any of them within 500 feet of a school?
I couldn't tell you that. I guess I really don't know.
Okay. I mean, I understand the motivation to not put them near a school. I just am not sure about how that's going to impact moving in the future. Most schools are, for instance,
Typically, they're farther back.
they're
correct.
farther back and, yeah. Okay, thank you, Neil.
Oh, I did have a question too on structural setbacks. I don't know if, when you're talking about a billboard, if you're talking about just the pole itself, because usually it spreads out over the top. If there's a 10-foot setback from the very edge of the sign face, or if it's just the pole itself.
Can we get an answer to that one, Hillary?
Yes. Because part of the ordinance says, the proposed ordinance is that we could just not overhang the property, the adjacent property or the right-of-way.
Sorry, I was trying to find that, where that is in the code language, so we could clarify that. Sorry, Neil. Did you find that one?
No, maybe not. It is section 4I.
Okay. Yeah, no portion of a billboard may extend into or over an area defined as a structural setback in the applicable zoning standards. So as I mentioned before, so for the commercial, it's 10 feet in the front unless 51% of the uses on that block are 0, then it would be allowed 0. So you would be allowed within that as long as you don't hang over and say the side setbacks are 0.
So it
So-
would be the.
So if there was a
the
10
support
foot
would
there,
be 10 feet back.
Right.
Not necessarily the sign face.
correct, and then you can't have it hang into.
Okay.
So if, depending on what it is, so on that one, I don't know, I haven't looked at the specific location, but if it was a 10-foot setback, then you make sure you couldn't extend into that setback area, including the sign face. So that is what that overhang
So the
is,
support would need to be
further back potentially,
further
yeah.
back, but not in the face itself.
Right, but as noted, those are pretty minimal setbacks in commercial.
We don't feel like this is something that would necessarily need to go to the city council to approve every time we want to. And there's a 10-year span that we can't, if we relocate, we can't relocate it again, and we're okay with that. But why would the city council would have to approve that every time we want to relocate a billboard? It seems awful cumbersome to the city when, if the staff has regulations that they have to follow, they should be able to determine whether we could move it to where we're proposing or not. Anyway, quit there, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and sharing your comments.
Thank you.
I would just, one response to that is, as far as, I think if it's within 75 feet, to require underground is a very minimal thing. I mean, if you think about 75 feet, I mean, that's our old little lots downtown, that's only a lot and a half wide, and if you were doing something at home, you'd do the conduit, and so I think that's a very minimal thing that could have a good impact, and it's a little piece in the right direction. And it's such a small universe of times that could even come up, so,
Thank you.
okay.
Any other public comment?
Hello, my name is James Fillmore. I'm a resident of Coeur d'Alene. I also think having the city review the contract seems excessive because the sign has to be conform to all the codes. So as long as the sign is structurally and placed okay, I'm not sure why it needs to look at the details between the sign company and the people that own the property. I do think the public hearing should still be required. I mean, there's only 8 or 9 of these signs, so, and they're gonna be, wherever they get moved, they stay there for 10 years, so it doesn't seem like that'd be an excessive burden. And we're not making an exception for the sign company, per se. We're not trying to, it's more about the fact that we're building something outside, and a lot of times when you have things built, you get comments from the neighbors, right? Neighborhoods know about things getting built, so it's more about what's getting built in an area, and I think an extra set of eyes is a good thing. I do think that the restriction to be further than 500 feet from any residential church park in any direction seems a little excessive in that along Northwest Boulevard and in part along 95, right, there's houses nearby, right? On 95, there's Mills and La Crosse, so I would think, it's 500, because it says 500 feet in any direction. If that's by the crow flies, there's, I'll call them detached neighborhoods that are within 500 feet, right? There's homes up, A, B, and C streets by Hubbard are up away from Northwest Boulevard, but they're within 500 feet, a couple houses there. So if, so if there's no connection between the house and the street, shall we say, and the arterial that the sign's going up, I don't know why there'd be a restriction there. But my biggest request, like I said, I have pros and cons on both of this, like all issues. I would like any signs, non-electronic signs that get moved, or even, repaired. I would like the lighting to be downward facing and make sure it only shines on the sign, not around the neighborhood. And that's consistent with existing code 17.07.130. There's, in the nuisance restrictions, you say you shouldn't create any glare. And so I'd like the signs not to create sky glow, nor if they're down facing, then they unfortunately have the chance of creating some glare for nearby homes or businesses or sidewalks. So they should be carefully illuminated. Also, I don't know if there's any restrictions on how bright the billboards can be illuminated. There's restrictions on the electronic signs, but if you have a mostly white sign with black or colored lettering, they could illuminate the heck out of that sign. I don't think they really do, but I wouldn't mind for it to be limited in some way. That's it. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Jeff Conaway. I own and operate Silver Creek Sign Company here in Coeur d'Alene. I served on the city sign board for 20 years or more. And the whole time I was on the sign board, we dealt with the sign code, revisions, all the things you guys are considering. And off-premises signs were seen to be not desirable for businesses in general. And so they had been prohibited the whole time I was on the sign board, which started back in 1989. At that point, we learned that new construction of billboards had been prohibited since 1968. And as I understand it, the reason was because they were considered to be sign clutter, and the ones that were already existent at that point were permitted to continue because the city felt they were unable to condemn them. I would like you to revisit that. I think that they are just a different form of off-premises advertising that benefit primarily the outdoor advertising companies and whoever is leasing the property to allow the signs to be there. I don't think they benefit the average citizen in this town, and I think as the town grows and gets more dense, that they are more sign clutter, and all the more so because they can be several times as big as any on-premises sign can be. And if nothing else, I would seriously consider reducing the size of them down to what on-premises signs are limited to. But I would say that you have a precious opportunity right here to revisit the entire issue. One thing I'm curious about is that back at the December meeting, in the letter that Kelly sent to us as sign company owners, which I even knew that this was going on, was that the city council had requested of the staff to prepare amendments such that billboards could be moved. And I'm curious why the city council even thought of that or cared unless you had been approached by the outdoor advertising companies. So that's one question I think is a germane question. And Dan Gookin, I spoke at the last meeting when the other 3 city council members were here, and he made an interesting comment toward the end of that meeting, something to the effect that, well, I've lived here for a long time, the billboards have been here for a long time, I kind of don't notice them. Well, if you do permit them to be moved, and my other question is, why do the companies want to move them?
30 seconds.
That if you do permit them to be moved and they go to new locations, I'll bet you'll hear a lot from local residents about what's this new billboard doing here. So again, I would ask you to consider going back to square one and finding a way to sunset existing leases and eliminating them from Coeur d'Alene. Thank you.
All right, I'm not seeing any more public comment, but I just want to offer the opportunity. All right, so with that, I don't know if I officially need to close public comment, but we will.
Probably.
We will close public comment and give the council members time to give some feedback. I have a list of questions that I'm happy to wait and allow you two to go.
No, go right
I've
ahead.
did them as we went.
Thank you. Hillary, they're a little bit, I just took notes during the presentation, so they're a bit all over the place, so bear with me.
Okay.
I just would like to confirm first on the electronic signs that this would apply, our amendments would apply to all electronic, or let me say this again, all digital signs, not just billboards.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. The next is kind of comments and questions. This is a big amendment, and it will impact our community for generations. So one not to be taken lightly. In my time on council, which we're nearing 12 years, I don't believe we've had a lot, if any, public testimony or public comment during a general services meeting. So I appreciate the community coming out to share their comments, but that gives me an indication on how serious and big of issue this is. With that being said, I have some comments on the sign board committee. Typically would have vetted this and done a lot of the work with the community on this before it arrived to council. With the sign board committee being dismantled or no longer in existence, is there any I think there's a lot of opportunity to have some of our other committees take a look at this and get their feedback and allow the public to give input there. And whether that's P and Z, I'm not sure the committees that it would be appropriate to review this. P and Z, our Historic Commission. I thought about Parking Commission, it doesn't really apply, but I was thinking the safety of the digital signs, probably not quite the fit there. But I'd like to suggest that we take a look at our commissions and have this vetted through them as appropriate, and the city staff can take a look at those. That would allow the public to have more opportunity to weigh in on this and share their thoughts on something that is so significant to our community. The last question I have is on the current locations versus new locations. Do we have an idea? I appreciate the map identifying the C-17 manufacturing, light manufacturing, but do we have an idea of how many additional locations could be available with this amendment?
We have not done that analysis. I would imagine there would be numerous locations because of, especially for the 300 square foot, the 615 foot limitation for those larger, the 672 square feet, which there's only a few of those, would be fewer locations, but there still are quite a few locations in the city where that would work. So as noted, this one is, so Northwest Boulevard, so south of I-90, it'd be 615 feet would be kind of that location. And then you'd have the locations here, south and north on US 95 would be those locations, and then on Celtice Way, so you would have with the larger signs. And then, as noted, anywhere zone C-17, as long as it kind of met those, the frontage requirement and could meet the setback requirements, and then performance in terms of kind of the height. It really could be anywhere in the city for the C-17 manufacturing and then the light manufacturing.
Could I follow up on that? So, but there's only 8 billboards, so.
Right.
And several of them are already on I-90 and 95, so they're not going to move. So the ability, and we're not talking about building new billboards, we're talking about relocating something from maybe a district that is no longer really a business district, for instance, the boulevard. My interest would be removing these things off of the boulevard, the entrance to the city, and if a billboard company wanted to move them to a more business district, that's advantageous to us. So I don't see that they're going to be littered all over the city when there's only 8 and maybe the possibility of 4 that would actually even move. So just my feedback on that.
Thank you. I think that concludes my questions. I'm very concerned about the aesthetics of the community. Christy touched on it, driving in down Northwest Boulevard, and billboards have their place and they have their value. There's no argument there. But really, I am interested in really preserving our aesthetics of Coeur d'Alene, and the reason we all love to live here and work here and visit here. So how to balance that, I'm really looking forward to the council full discussion on that. Yeah.
Well, I have a couple of, I guess, my kind of final responses. It's funny how something in the past can come back that you think, oh, well, that'll never, but I happened to be on city council for a 2-year term in the early 90s before I got appointed as county clerk. And one of the big things we had that came up then was the off-premise sign for Safeway when it was allowed to move from Safeway property out to the corner, which I guess is now that other thing. I had kind of a weird infection thing, was in the hospital, but, and I, try not to make up my mind ahead of time, but I have a very strong feeling that had I been able to attend that meeting, I would have voted against letting them move it. And, if we hadn't changed that, I don't know what would happen now. But, so things we do now, we're going to have a long time thing. I think public comment is critical. The idea, we've had lots of experience with that lately. And so, you know, there is certainly no rush for this kind of a thing. The other thing, I guess, just from, you know, time here, school board had their attorney, at the county. I mean, we had a whole civil department. What they do, part of what they do is review contracts. And that's their job. Everything from, you know, lease contracts that look like, gee, that's going to be the same every time, to big things. So, and again, the universe is very small here, so I don't, you know, I would certainly not want to, I couldn't vote for something if it was just, you know, our city attorney couldn't even look at it or something. So so I think it's good, yeah. Go to the council and have an interesting discussion. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, again, this isn't about building new billboards. This is about moving an existing billboard. It's not about, you know, unleashing billboards all over the city. It's the ability for a company to move a billboard that maybe is in an area that maybe is no longer desirable. For me, the Northwest, we talked about, you know, the aesthetics. I think that's a great opportunity to give them the opportunity to move a billboard off of Northwest, or wherever these other ones are, and to the more business district. And what I want to remind council, when we talk about this with the full council, is they're a local business. And we just did a motion to support a local business. We need to support local business and industry that way. Not only are they a local business, but they serve local businesses. So if you look at the face of these billboards, Kootenai Health, Silverwood, Super One, North Idaho College, LCSC, these are all local businesses that need this advertising space. We have dealt with growth in this community, and with growth comes the demand. And I don't know, and I didn't ask Neil to speak to this, but I think it's probably fairly difficult to get billboard space. So there is a demand, and I think that we have to, as council, we have to respect that and support a local business and all the local businesses that use this. So for me, it's such a simple thing of we want to move a billboard out of one area over to a more appropriate area. I don't think there has to be 19 pages of red tape, but there does need to be some regulations. I absolutely agree with that. We have to look out for the city interest, and cities do have ordinances and codes that support the city industry, and we do that for our citizens. So what I was hoping is that the industries that are represented could continue to work with staff. I think they're very close. I think they've agreed on a lot of things. I know Troy had a meeting with one of the industry CEOs, and I think they've come a long way on what they can agree on. I don't think this needs to go to several different committees, because when you do that, you're prohibiting that business from moving forward. And so I don't think they're that far apart that we have to put this through several different more committees. Public comment is good. We should make sure that the public knows that it's on the agenda and come and provide their comment. But I don't think we need to give them months and months of delay with more committees. So I would like to see this move forward to the full council for discussion. I guess with that, I would make a motion.
And I would second that, again, at that meeting, if if there are some tweaking like we've had in our other things, is frankly, when we've had a hearing, something like that on the spot, somebody will agree to, we can meet in the middle here. So I think, to keep it moving, so is reasonable.
Okay. So a motion and a second, further discussion?
Just when would that come up then, or?
The June meeting would be problematic because of Association of Idaho Cities conference right. So, and then July is going to be a little tricky because we have the week of the first meeting in July is the holiday week, and several staff members are gone.
You want to do it
The next meeting? Isn't that when? Oh, so she's here for the 18th. Okay.
So
Okay.
next meeting, okay.
next meeting.
I'm good.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And with that, that is our,
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you for joining us today.